What happens when a dystopian march becomes a national obsession? Let's explore the long walk.
Hey, I'm Garrett, feeling curious and ready to go on this one.
And I'm Leah, excited to dig in and learn something new today. Welcome to Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett.
All right, let's set the stage for this one. Today's topic is The Long Walk. That's the 2025 film adaptation of Stephen King's novel, published under his Richard Bachman name. The movie was directed by Francis Lawrence, who is the filmmaker at the helm, and written by J.T. Molnar, who handled the screenplay. Here's a thought I've been turning over. I've always been drawn to dystopian stories because they feel, uncomfortably plausible. Swap a few details and suddenly it's our world with harsher lighting. I remember watching a bleak thriller in college and thinking, if people were desperate enough, could they be nudged into cheering for something cruel just because it looked like a game? The Long Walk sort of hits that nerve for me. It's like asking, what if we made a sport out of survival? That's heavy, but it's also the kind of premise that makes you look around and ask why we watch what we watch.
Let's open the book on what this actually is. The Long Walk is a dystopian survival thriller. Dystopian just means a messed-up society built on control and fear. Here, that control comes from a totalitarian regime, which is a government that tries to dominate nearly every part of life through force. The film is set in an alternate 1970s United States. Think vintage cars and old broadcast gear, but with a military government running the show. The premise is simple and brutal. 50 teenage boys must walk at least 3 miles per hour without stopping. If they slow down enough to get 3 warnings, soldiers execute them on the spot. Last one standing wins a lot of money and 1 wish. It's like a deadly reality show. Stopping means death, and the cameras never look away.
All right, let's dig into this. The setting is a dystopian 1970s America after a civil war. The economy is in the tank, and the military regime has turned pain into programming. They run a nationally televised event called The Long Walk, meant to pump up patriotism and the so-called work ethic during a deep depression. Soldiers are not just guards, they are also the media apparatus, broadcasting the march as the boys pass through towns and cities. The key characters you meet along the road include Leah Garrett, who is the entrant from Maine and kind of the emotional anchor, Pete McVries, who becomes Ray's steady foil and friend, Billy Stebbins, whose story hides a heavy twist, and the Major, played by Mark Hamill, who is the smiling overseer of the whole event. The Major is the face of authority here. He congratulates, cajoles, and frames executions as simple discipline. It is chilling because his cheerfulness makes the violence feel routine.
The rules are painfully clear. Walkers get water and rations, but no rest. If their pace drops below about 3 miles per hour or they stop, they get a warning. 3 warnings and they are shot. That blunt math leads to awful early moments. The first casualty is Curly after a Charlie horse, which is a leg cramp, and then Barkovich, who is a volatile competitor, taunts Rank Sanders into a panic. Sanders attacks and is executed. As the days grind on, deaths come from fatigue, injuries, and bad luck, and the psychology phrase. Ray and Pete build a fragile bond. Pete says he will not let others die for him to win. He will sit down when he has had enough. Ray thinks about using the wish for vengeance because his father was executed by the regime. That tension between self-sacrifice and revenge runs right through the middle of the film.
The middle stretch shows how camaraderie and collapse can sit side by side. Hank Olson grows delirious and attacks soldiers. He is shot. The surviving boys make a pact to send money to Hank's widow if they win. Barkovich, who has been toxic and isolated, begs to join the pact. Ray lets him in, and then Barkovich spirals and kills himself by stabbing his throat with a spoon. That detail is brutal, but it underlines how deprivation turns even mundane objects into danger. Later, the walk goes through Ray's hometown in Maine. He breaks ranks to reach for his mom, Ginny, and almost dies for it until Pete pulls him back. Then Collie Parker steals a rifle, shoots a soldier, and after being wounded, dies by suicide. That rupture shows a crack in the regime's choreography, even though the machinery of enforcement clamps down again fast.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Billy Stebbins reveals he is the Major's illegitimate son. He planned to use the winner's wish to be accepted into his father's home. That twist reframes the walk as not just public theater, but also a private tragedy about wanting recognition from the man who runs the killing machine. Stebbins eventually stops, and we reach a final pair, Ray and Pete. On the fifth day, after about 330 miles, in a rain-soaked city, Pete sits. Ray lifts him, then Ray stops. The Major congratulates Pete, and Pete asks for a carbine, which is a lighter, shorter rifle used by soldiers. In one ending, Pete uses it to kill the Major and then walks away. In an alternate ending, Pete spares him, drops the gun, keeps walking, and a postscript implies he sends monthly cash to Hank's widow, to Ray's mother, Ginny, and to Art Baker's grandmother with Art's rosary and cross. Two choices, one explosive, one quietly restorative.
Let's shift over to how this was made. The director is Francis Lawrence, known for large-scale dystopias, taking on a lean, character-first piece. The screenplay is by J.T. Mullner. The cast is a strong ensemble. Cooper Hoffman and David Johnson are central to that emotional core, and Mark Hamill as the Major brings that unsettling, friendly menace. The production started filming in Winnipeg and did something rare. They shot the movie in chronological order. Chronological shooting means filming scenes in the same order the story happens. Usually productions scramble for locations and shoot out of sequence, but here going in order let the actors' genuine fatigue and bonds build for real. You feel that attrition in their bodies and voices. For music, Jeremiah Freitas composed a spare, aching score, and the film includes an original country ballad called Took a Walk, performed by Shabuzi and Stephen Wilson Jr. The music leans into plain-spoken melancholy, which matches the rain, the roads, and the boys' exhaustion.
On the reception side, critics praised the performances and stark cinematography. Outlets like RogerEbert.com, Variety, and The Daily Beast highlighted the emotional impact and what one called a stark, morose beauty. Some reviewers, like The Guardian, The Washington Post, and The New York Times, pushed back on the thin world-building and the ambiguous ending. Audience polling by CinemaScore, which asks opening night moviegoers to grade films from A+ to F, landed at a B. That's solid, suggesting people were engaged even if the ending split opinions. The box office tells a similar story. It opened in September 2025, earned about $11.7 million its first weekend, and eventually reached around $63 million worldwide against a $20 million budget. Producer Roy Lee said it basically broke even and might gain status over time, comparing that long-tail reevaluation to The Shawshank Redemption, another Stephen King adaptation that grew in esteem after release.
And a quick nod to its pop culture footprint. The Long Walk closed the 58th Sitges Film Festival. Sitges is a major Spanish festival known for fantasy and horror, and that spotlight says a lot about how genre audiences embraced it. Awards-wise, it picked up nominations from groups like the Austin and Seattle Critics, the London Film Critics Circle, and the Saturn Awards. The ensemble was also nominated for the Robert Altman Award at the Film Independent Spirit Awards, an honor designed to recognize cohesive casting and ensemble work, which tracks with how much this film rides on the chemistry between the boys.
Okay, let's move on to the debates. The big one is that ending. Some critics wondered if Pete killing the Major and then casually walking away is plausible. Tasha Robinson, a critic at Polygon, questioned why soldiers and crowds would just stand down. Billin Edwards, who writes for Mashable, floated the idea that the finale could be a dying vision or a subjective image masking a fatal aftermath. Garrett, I want your take. Do you see the assassination as a real break in the regime's power or something more like a symbolic flare that only burns in Pete's mind?
I lean toward the assassination being literal inside the story. Here's why. The walk is the regime's pristine pageant. If the winner uses his wish to kill the host of the spectacle on live television, even if the apparatus reasserts control later, that moment punctures the illusion of inevitability. It says the rules can be bent from inside the ritual. I get that the soldier's inaction seems unlikely, but the event is so choreographed that a split second of shock tracks for me. The film plays that beat with rain, noise, and disorientation. In a crowd that dense, a single decisive act could slip through before anyone recalibrates. So to me, it is not tidy, but it is possible, and that possibility matters.
I hear that, and I kind of go the other way. The walk into the rain feels symbolic to me. Pete has reached the end of a ritual that consumed him, so the assassination plays as the mind's last act of control. Then the alternate ending, where he spares the major and quietly sends money to families, hints at a different thesis, that healing is private and not always public spectacle. Both endings point to the same emotional hangover, survivor's guilt. The spare and penitent version rings truer to me about trauma. Real talk, not every story of defiance ends with a system crumbling on camera.
While we're on questions, why does the regime say this? Walk helps the economy. The movie never really shows a mechanism for that, and the Washington Post flagged that gap. I think it's intentional. The state's claim is a pretext. The real function is propaganda and control. Televising the walk normalizes cruelty and turns fear into a shared ritual. The promise of a wish dangles hope, but the attrition teaches obedience. The film keeps that macro logic vague, maybe to mimic how propaganda handwaves details and just sells you on a feeling.
Totally. And that vagueness feeds the world-building debate. Some viewers wanted more backstory and policy detail. Others felt the actors made the boys specific enough that the minimalism worked. Variety praised the ensemble as well-rounded, while The Guardian said the script left too much to fill in. I sit in the middle. The austerity helps the themes land, but once or twice I wanted a single clear line about how the walk became such a beloved tradition. Just a breadcrumb. It's a taste thing. The film chooses immediacy over context, and that choice is consistent with Stephen King's original novel, which was also stark and allegorical, a story built like a fable to mirror big ideas about power and spectacle.
Speaking of consistency, the decision to film in order sells the attrition. You can see the boys' posture buckle and their conversations thin. Some folks argue you could do that with makeup and coaching, but walking the road day after day gives you an uncoachable wariness. It's like sanding wood for hours. The grain changes under your hands. You don't need to act the ache. You already have it.
Before we pivot, a couple more context notes. The film's development took decades. George A. Romero, the influential horror filmmaker, considered it in the late 1980s, but it did not move forward. Frank Darabont, who directed The Shawshank Redemption, secured rights in 2007 and talked about a small, weird, contained version. The project later shifted, and Lionsgate finally took it on with Francis Lawrence directing and J.T. Molnar writing. It's kind of poetic that a story about endurance also endured a long road to production.
Next up, relevance. As a Stephen King adaptation, it adds to a long line of page-to-screen crossings. Closing Sitches cemented its genre cred, and with its box office legs and a cinema score B, it has that profile of a film people discuss after the credits. If there were a follow-up, I wouldn't want a straight sequel so much as a sideways look, maybe another year's walk from a different angle, or a story about the broadcast crew who package it for the nation, not to expand the lore for its own sake, but to press on the same moral bruise from a new point of view.
All right, on to a counterfactual or two. What if the long walk included all genders rather than only boys? On one level, the propaganda effect could intensify. The regime could claim universal sacrifice and shared grit, trying to fold more of society into its ritual. On another level, public appetite might shift in complicated ways. Seeing girls and boys collapse on the same road could either harden people or finally snap the illusion, depending on cultural attitudes. My gut says the regime might prefer to target boys because it ties the spectacle to ideas of militarized masculinity in that era. But opening it up could make the propaganda feel more national and less like a training ground.
Here's another angle to look at. What if the event were not televised and happened in secret? Could the regime still control people through fear? I think yes, but differently. Secrecy breeds rumors. You might get whispered terror and targeted disappearances rather than appointment viewing. The TV broadcast turns the walk into a ritual you schedule your day around. That routine normalizes it. Without cameras, the state loses the pageantry and the chance to sell the walk as patriotism. They would still have fear, but they would lose fandom. And fandom, as ugly as that is in this context, is part of the power.
One last twist on that. If it were secret, Families might cling harder to small acts of resistance because there is no stage to watch. With the televised version, people can tell themselves they are just spectators. Off camera, the line between bystander and participant blurs. That is where quiet defiance could grow, or where despair could deepen. Either way, the absence of spectacle changes the moral math.
All right, that ties it up nicely. Stay curious, keep asking why stories like this stick, and maybe take a slow walk that does not require a stopwatch.
And that's where we'll leave it for now. Thanks for exploring the long walk with me. Let's keep learning, and let's keep it kind.